In this video, we're going to work through how to install WordPress on your computer. So it will be using your computer's server, and we're not going to be serving this site online. It's going to be installed on your computer. And we're going to be referring to that as the development version of WordPress, because if you were developing a WordPress website for a client, you would want to install it on your computer first and do your development there before launching it live on the internet for a client. So the first thing that we need to make sure that we do is we don't want to be doing any live coding, and we don't want to be making any significant changes to our code without tracking those changes. So we're going to track all of our site's work on GitHub. So the first thing that you'll want to do is go to GitHub and in your profile, if you don't already have a profile, you should make one. But in your profile, create a repository. And you can set that up in GitHub as a public repository and set it up with a README. So let's just go through that very quickly. This is a little bit of a review because I think that probably most people are already aware of how to do that. But on GitHub, it's the new repository button that you want to click. We're going to call this something very simple. I'm going to call it DevTools 2 McGlade 2, only because I already have one called DevTools 2 McGlade. You should put a brief description, development version of client website, say. I'm going to leave it as public. I am definitely going to initialize with a README, and I'm not going to worry about git ignore right now, although we will add one. You just create repository, and there it is. Then you have it. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is you are going to want to make a clone of that empty repository, or at least it's only got a README in it for now. By the way, if you go through this and you forget to do the README, it's not really a big deal in this case. You can just create that empty repository because we will be filling it up soon enough. So what you'll need to do is get the clone URL. Just a little reminder of where that is. It is under this green button, clone or download. I'm just going to grab that URL. I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to go into my command prompt. This might be the terminal if you're on a Mac, or it might be git bash if you're on a PC. And I am going to navigate into my root directory. Now, we're going to look at that in a little more detail in a sec in terms of what we mean by root directory. But for me, that root directory is sites, and I'm going to git clone that repository that I just made. And there it is. It has done that, and I can check if it's done that by doing an ls on that sites folder. I have a lot of files in here, so I'm going to need to kind of search for that a little bit. But there it is right there. That is the one that I just made. So I do know that it's there. Now, if you don't know what I mean by root directory, you can hold off on doing that procedure for a minute or two because we're going to look at what we mean by that right now. So to run WordPress on your computer, you need three things. You need all the files that make up the application, and you need a web server, and you need a database. We'll go back to the files in the database in a moment. Right now, we're just going to talk about the web server. So because WordPress is coded or written in PHP, it needs an Apache server to run. Now, everyone already has an Apache server on their computers. They just usually don't have them activated, or they don't really know how to get at them unless they install some software called MAMP, WAMP, or XAMPP. And the A in MAMP, WAMP, or XAMPP stands for Apache. That is the Apache server that you need. So if you don't have a working version of MAMP, WAMP, or XAMPP installed, do it now. So we're not going to run through that. It's fairly self-evident how to do it from the MAMP, WAMP, or XAMPP websites. If you're working on a Mac, you definitely want to use MAMP. If you're working on a PC, you might try WAMP first. Some people have found that doesn't work well for them. It depends on your operating system, I suppose, or the age of your computer. You might try XAMPP. In any event, you'll need to set up your root directory. That's the root directory I was just talking about when we did that little bit of work in terminal or git bash. So your root directory is usually set up for you by MAMP, WAMP, or XAMPP. So on a PC, it has probably put a folder onto your computer as part of the install called www or htdocs. So your best bet is just to use that folder. And that is going to be your root directory for all PHP development that you are going to want to do. On MAMP, you can assign your root directory. And I'm just going to very quickly go through where that can be found. In your little MAMP setup window, if you go into Preferences and you go into this fourth tab, Web Server, you can tell it where you want your document root to be by clicking on this little folder icon. So I'm not going to do it because it's fairly obvious how to do that if you just try it yourself. But what I've done is I have set my document root to be my sites folder because I don't want to dig around and put everything in some htdocs folder inside the MAMP software. So I've set it up to be sites. So that's what I mean when I refer to root directory. So that's where you actually need to git clone into when you do your git clone. I'll just go back to that screen. So when you go to do your git clone, you need to navigate into your root directory. As you can see here, I navigated into my sites directory. So once you've done all of that, that means that you have the Apache server. So we've got 1/3 of the 3 things that we need to run WordPress. If you've done that MAMP install, you know where your root directory is, or you've set up your root directory. If you hadn't already done it, go make sure that you git clone your repository into that directory so that now you've got a repository in your root directory. The next step is we need the WordPress files. So all the files that make up WordPress are available for free at wordpress.org. So really all you need to do is go to wordpress.org and download those files. So let's just do that very quickly. So if you go to wordpress.org, it's really obvious, big blue button in the upper right. You just download WordPress. And it's going to show you the latest version here. And that's the one that we're going to download. And it's going to offer this zip file. What I'm going to do is put the zip file into my root directory. So I'm going to need to navigate there. Let's just go over and do it here. So it's hard to see, it's going off the screen a little bit, but I have navigated into my root directory and I'm going to just download that WordPress zip file right into it. The reason it's not a bad idea to do that is it's never a bad idea to keep a bunch of different versions of WordPress around. So if I just go to my root directory and show you what I've got in there right now, I have a few different zip files of WordPress in there, all the way back to 4.3.1. It's not unusual that you may have a website that you developed in a previous version of WordPress and you installed some plugins or you used a certain theme, and when WordPress pushes through their update to a newer version, some of your themes and plugin developers may not be keeping up. So it is possible that if you install the newest version of WordPress before your themes and plugins have been updated, that you might, some things on your site might break. So it's always possible that you might need to revert back to a previous version of WordPress. So it's always good to keep those around. So I've just put those right in my sites folder, just so that I have them. So now we've got the files and we've got the web server. So what is next? It is the database. Now, if you have got MAMP or WAMP or XAMPP on your computer, your database should be found at localhost/phpMyAdmin. Now, you'll see in my address bar there, it actually says localhost:8888. The reason for that is that my MAMP installation is using that port for the Apache web server. So I'm just going to show you where that is to be found in MAMP. In MAMP, you can see that Apache is using that port, and that's why it says localhost 8888 in there. If I were to set this to port 80, I wouldn't need to type anything. But there's always the possibility that you're going to have conflicts with various applications that are using different ports on your computer. And in fact, if you find that your WAMP or XAMPP or MAMP are not working with this port, it's often a good idea just to change the port. And that might help to get it working, just because something else might be using 8888. And it's sometimes easier just to change your Apache port than to try and figure out what else might be using it. So let's just get out of there. So once you go to localhost colon, or in my case, :8888/phpMyAdmin, you should have a screen that looks something like this. There's probably a couple of databases already on the side here. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to click the New button so that you can create a new database. It's pretty much as easy as that. You just click the New button. And then you're going to want to say what is the name of your database. Now, this screen is showing you a database that I created for a client, so I'm using the client site name. I would recommend that you just use the name of your repository and of your site, that you just keep them all the same. Then you never have to remember, oh, I called that database something else. Your database names then always sort of match your site name. So let's just go in and have a quick look at that live also. So I'm just going to go into my phpMyAdmin. It's auto-filling for me there. And for example, for that DevTools site, I've made a database and I've just called it DevTools2cMcGlade. So I would have clicked New and just typed it in there. And then you click Create when you're ready to go to make that database. And you will end up with seeing the name of the database that you just created over on the left here. So let's make another one just to maybe do one for that other repository that I made, which was DevTools2McGlade2. Click Create, and there it is over on the left. So that's pretty much all you need to do for now in phpMyAdmin. Now we've got our database, we've got our files, but they're all zipped up. We've got our Apache web server. So let's extract that zip file. And what is going to happen is you're going to end up with a folder in your root directory just called WordPress. So let's just see what that looks like. Here is my latest version here that I just downloaded, WordPress 4.7.1. If I just double click on that to extract it, I end up with a WordPress folder, and there's all kinds of files in here. Now, the thing that I will say right away is don't mess with any of these files. You don't want to rename any of them or accidentally delete any of them, because WordPress is just a bunch of files, but these are PHP files. So they all have a lot of functionality in them. and they're all connected and they all work together to install and then build a content management system. So if you delete one or you change the name of one, your site basically won't work at all. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to select all those files and make sure that you've selected all of them. And you just want to move them into your repository, which is, for me, is right there. So this is what it looks like when I've moved them all into my repository. And what I would suggest you do is make sure they're all there. Do a little quick check. Let's just go back and look in this WordPress site. And now what's interesting is just in doing that quick check, I noticed this list seems a little shorter than this list. Just eyeballing it, it does. And in fact, it is. And the reason is because my repository has this README file in it. And that's fine. That won't do anything to your WordPress install. So I've got all my files in here. What I would probably suggest you do, again, just so there's no confusion, is just now delete this WordPress folder. You don't need it anymore. You can always unzip the files again if you need to. But for now, you don't need it. So I'm just going to delete it. And now I have all of my files in here, in this folder called DevTools2 McGlade, which is also a clone of my Git repository. So now we're ready to do the installation. In other words, ready to open up WordPress and let it do its thing, because we've got the files, we've got the web server, and we've got the database. It's all ready to go. And if you named your database something other than the name of your Git repository project WordPress install, make sure that you noted it down somewhere. Otherwise, you're going to have to go back and check as we do the rest of this installation. So installing WordPress now is very, very simple. You just go to localhost. Again, in my case, it's localhost 8888. It may not be that for you if you're not using that port. And then the next thing you type after the slash is the name of that folder. So in my case, I would go to localhost 8888 / DevTools2 McGlade. And when I do that, I'm going to see this on the screen. And what I'm going to do is just scroll down, and I'm going to check English Canada. It doesn't really matter if you check English US or English Canada. I'm going to check English Canada, and I'm going to hit continue. Then you should see this screen. So this screen is a good reminder. If in this process you had forgotten to set up the database, this would remind you. By the way, you're going to need a database to finish this. So we did our database already. We created our database, and hopefully you named it the same name as your repository, so we should be ready to go. So WordPress is telling you here, and this is important to note, we're going to use this information to create a WP config file. So you can always change the details in the WP config file later. So if you forgot to make a database or something, or if you type in the wrong thing, don't despair. We can always fix it. But hopefully you've made your database, so you're ready to click Let's Go. Then you'll see a screen that looks like this. So you'll want to enter in the database name of the database that you set up. It'll say WordPress. You want to put in your own database name there, obviously. Where it says username, you want to put in your username. You want to put in root. For the password on a Mac, for the Mac version of PHPMyAdmin, you need the password root. On a PC, you probably leave this MySQL password blank. There are some installs of XAMPP, I believe, where you need the password root, but usually on a PC you leave it blank. If you leave it blank and it doesn't work, you just go back and fill in root. So to be safe on a Mac, do root, name of your database, root. The host name is localhost, you can leave it. And the table prefix is WP underscore, you can leave that, and click submit. Then you will see this great little screen. It's saying that you've made it through this part of the installation, and now WordPress is communicating with your database, so you can run the install. So feel free to click that button. It should happen fairly quickly, and you will get this welcome screen. So you need to fill in a little bit of information here. And as they say, don't worry, you can always change these settings later, but you may as well do it now. So here, fill in your site title. Again, I would tend to keep it all the same. This is a screen grab from a client site, so I used this name, but you might want to use DevTools2, your last name as your site title. For your username, do not use admin. That's a standard way that people will be able to hack into your WordPress website. Is they're always on the lookout for usernames admin. So don't use admin. Now, that being said, this website is only on your computer. It's not going up online. So you don't really need to use a strong password. And I would recommend rather that you use a password that's quite simple and that you are going to remember. Fill in your email. I'm not really sure if it will help if you forget your password, because again, it's on your computer, it's not online. Fill in your email. And I think in later versions of WordPress, this area is actually, you want to check it to discourage search engines from indexing the site. So you want to discourage search engines from indexing the site, although again, it's on your computer, so they don't have access to it anyway, so it doesn't matter. So once you've got everything filled in, you can click Install WordPress, and you should get this screen. And the next thing to do is to click Log In, and you'll get the screen. If it doesn't automatically fill in the username and password that you filled in for the WordPress admin screen now, this isn't your username and password for the database, which was root. This is the username and password that you filled in on this screen. That's the one that you want to fill in on this screen. Click Remember Me so you don't have to keep filling it in all the time. And then click Log In. And you will be able to see the fantastic dashboard of your WordPress development website. We're going to look through this dashboard in more detail in another video. But just for now, go back to localhost/phpMyAdmin and have a look in your database. Now, what has happened, what WordPress does in this installation process is it actually puts all kinds of tables in the database. And it's important to have a little bit of an understanding of what some of these do. One that's going to be important is this the user meta and the WordPress options. Actually, the WordPress options is probably the most important one. We don't really need to do anything with it now, but just go back in and have a look. It's interesting to see what WordPress has done there. And what you can also have a look at now is if you go back into your WordPress folder, let's go back in to the live folder here. Now there is actually a new file in the list that wasn't there before, and it's a WP config file. So open that up and have a look. I'm going to open it up in Sublime Text. And let's just size this down a little bit. But you should be able to see what's in this WP config file. And what WordPress has done in that installation process, it has put the database name into this file, the user, and the password. So again, if you found that you put in root and it didn't work, you can always go into this file and remove the password root if you're on a PC. It's filled in a whole bunch of other stuff. Not really important, but it did fill in that table prefix that we said, yes, use that WP underscore. But this is the most important file of this WP config file, is this part. And this is probably one of the most important files that we're going to want to git ignore, because it contains our database username and password. Now, in this case, because this is just a development version of the website, it's not critically important. If anyone were to see this on GitHub, there's not much they could do about it because it's on your computer, so they can't get at it. But when you're actually developing a website for a client, you do want to git ignore the WP config file. So let's just pop in and have a look at what that would look like. So I'm gonna clear this screen just to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on. Now I am already in my root directory here. I'm in my sites directory. I'm just going to do a pwd on a Mac. That will tell me where I am just to make sure. I believe on a PC it is dir is the command. And yes, I'm in my sites folder. So let's just do an ls. And I can see all my files. And the one that I want to go into is DevTools 2. So I can actually, maybe I can copy that. And let's go cd into DevTools 2. Now I'm going to do an ls-la in here. And I can see all my WordPress files that I dragged in there. That WP config file that WordPress made in the install. There's my README. And I've actually already made a git ignore in here, but I can just walk you through the process of making that git ignore. Now, on a PC, this command might be different, but on a Mac, it's nano git ignore. And what this does is, if there is not already a file called git ignore, sorry, it's nano dot git ignore. It's a dot file. If there's not already a file, it will make one and open it in a text editor. If there is already a file, it will just open it in a text editor. So what you want to put inside that text editor, which is your git ignore file, is you want to put wp-config.php so that it will ignore that file. And to get out of this particular text editor, it is Control X. And if I had put something else in there, let's go in and add something else to that file that is also kind of a Mac problem, but it's another dot file. It's this ds store file. So I'm going to add that as well, because I do not want that going up on GitHub. I'm going to do a Control X to exit. It's asking me if I want to save. The answer is Y for yes. It's asking me now again, the file name to write, is it .gitignore? Again, that's a yes. Whoops. That is a return key. So now I have put in my git ignore. I've got all my files in here. I know they're being tracked by Git because I can see that I have a .git file. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a git status. And there's a whole bunch of stuff here, a whole bunch of files that are ready to be tracked, but they have not been committed. So the next thing we want to do is git add. And I'm going to do git add and then a dot. And the reason I'm doing that is because I just want to tell it add all the files that are read. I don't have to add all the files that are read. I could add them one by one, but that would be very, very time consuming. Because some of these are not files, they're actually folders, and there's a lot of files in them. So let's hit return, and it takes a second or two to do that. Let's try git status again. And there's a lot. It's opened up all the folders now, and it's showing us all the files. So there's quite a few. I'm not even going to scroll through all those. There's way too many. Now what I want to do is I want to commit these to the repository on my computer. So to do that, I do git commit, and I need to do -m because I want to add a commit message. You always want to add a commit message. And my commit message is going to be initial commit of WordPress installed files. I haven't written any code yet, I've just installed the files. So this is just my initial commit. I'm going to close those quote marks and hit return. And now if I do a git status, it's saying that I'm on branch master. I'm on the master branch, and we've only made one branch. But it's also telling me that my branch master is ahead of origin master by one commit. And origin master is, of course, GitHub. That's where we cloned this repository from. It is the original repository, and this is essentially a copy of it. So it is the kind of the main master, and we're now ahead of it. So in order to get them both to be in sync, we need to use git push. So I am going to do that. And it's taken a second or two. And now if we do a git status, it's saying that we're up to date with origin master. Nothing to commit, which is great. So let's just have a very quick look again at, let's go back to GitHub and just see what is going on in our repository. So I'm just going to scroll down, and there is the one that I had been working with. That's the one I just did the git push. And sure enough, there is my commit message, initial commit of WordPress installed files, and there's all my files. So you don't really want to do anything to these files on GitHub. You just want to keep them there, keep them synchronized. Like, you don't want to go in and make any changes on GitHub. Just leave them all there. You want to do everything on your computer, and then you're using GitHub as the central repository where you're keeping all of your committed code. I will be able to see your commit messages as well on GitHub. So it's important that you just make sure that they're descriptive and that they make sense with what you're doing. So that means that you have effectively completed your WordPress install.